The motorcycle rolled into the shop just before closing time, low rumble, clean chrome, custom lines that told a story before the engine even shut off. It wasn't flashy in a loud way. It was precise, intentional, the kind of bike that only someone who truly loved riding would own. Most of the mechanics barely looked up. Marcus Hill did. He wiped his hands on a rag and studied the machine the way a doctor studies a heartbeat. Something was off, not broken, not obvious, but wrong enough that an untrained eye would miss it completely. The throttle response lagged by half a breath. Tiny, dangerous at high speed. The rider removed his helmet. Quiet, calm, no entourage, no attitude, just a man asking if someone could take a look. Before the manager could respond, Marcus stepped forward. "I've got it," he said, already kneeling. Rick Donovan, the shop manager, stiffened. His jaw tightened. Marcus noticed, he always noticed, but he kept working, because that's what he did. He listened to engines the way some people listen to people. 10 minutes later, Marcus had found the issue. A custom mod installed wrong by another shop. He fixed it cleanly. No extra charge, no showboating, just respect for the craft. The rider took the bike for a short spin. When he came back, his eyes were different, focused, impressed. "That was it," he said simply. "You fixed what 3 other shops couldn't." Before Marcus could even smile, Rick exploded. "What the hell do you think you're doing touching a bike like that?" Rick barked, loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "You don't make decisions here, you don't talk to premium clients, you don't represent this business." The room froze. Marcus stood up slowly, grease still on his hands, confusion flashing across his face. He tried to explain. Rick didn't let him. "You're done," Rick snapped. "Clean out your locker." Fired just like that. No warning, no discussion, no defense. The rider stood there, silent, watching as Marcus removed his gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them on the counter. No begging, no anger, just dignity wrapped around disappointment. As Marcus walked out of the shop, the rider finally asked one quiet question. "Why would you fire the best mechanic you have?" Rick scoffed. "He's replaceable." The rider looked at Marcus's back, disappearing into the night, and thought to himself, what they didn't know was that this moment would change everything. Marcus Hill hadn't always planned to work in someone else's shop. When he was a kid, grease-stained manuals and rusted tools had been his bedtime stories. His father, Elijah Hill, worked out of a cramped garage behind their house. No signboard, no permits, just skill and reputation. People came from miles away because Elijah fixed what others gave up on. He used to tell Marcus, "Engines don't lie. People do. Learn the difference." That lesson stayed. After his father passed, Marcus carried more than grief. He carried unfinished dreams, responsibility, and a quiet promise to himself that he would honor the craft the right way, honest work, clean fixes, no shortcuts. The motorcycle shop where Marcus now worked wasn't glamorous, but it was known. A mid-sized operation catering to riders who wanted reliability more than flash. On paper, it was a merit-based workplace. In reality, it ran on hierarchy, ego, and unspoken rules. At the top of those rules stood Rick Donovan. Rick was the kind of manager who confused authority with respect. Early 40s, loud voice, tight smiles. He talked about standards and company image constantly, words that always seemed to land harder on Marcus than anyone else. Rick never said anything outright. He didn't have to. It was always tone, timing, who got corrected publicly and who got pulled aside privately. Marcus noticed patterns long before he admitted them to himself. New mechanics, mostly white, less experienced, were given the easy jobs, the customer-facing work, the chances to shine. Marcus was handed the complicated fixes, the problem cases, the bikes no one wanted to touch. When those bikes rolled out perfect, Rick took credit by saying, "That's how we do things here." When mistakes happened, Rick made sure Marcus's name was the one said out loud. Still, Marcus stayed. Not because he was weak, but because he was tired. Tired of starting over. Tired of proving himself again and again in rooms where people decided who he was before he ever spoke. At home, bills didn't care about pride. Responsibility didn't wait for justice. So Marcus did what he always did. He worked. He trained the new hires without complaint. He stayed late when engines refused to cooperate. He fixed errors quietly, never exposing coworkers even when their mistakes could have gotten someone hurt. He believed that consistency would eventually outweigh bias. But deep down, there was a wound. Marcus felt invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Expected to be exceptional, yet never exceptional enough to lead. Trusted with machines worth thousands of dollars, but not trusted with authority, voice, or respect. The shop itself reflected that tension. There were jokes that landed wrong, conversations that stopped when Marcus walked in, customers who assumed he was an assistant, not a master technician. Marcus corrected them politely. Rick never did. And then there were the warnings. "Don't get too comfortable," Rick once told him, leaning against a tool chest. "Around here, loyalty matters." Marcus understood the message beneath the words. Stay in your lane. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves moved through the world in the opposite way people expected of someone like him. Writing was his escape. No premieres, no interviews, just road, wind, and machines that responded honestly. His motorcycle wasn't a status symbol, it was an extension of himself. That's why he noticed details others missed. That's why he listened more than he spoke. When he entered that shop, he didn't see fame reflected back at him. He saw a system. He saw who spoke and who stayed quiet, who was listened to and who was tolerated. He noticed Marcus not because Marcus demanded attention, but because Marcus didn't. Because real skill doesn't announce itself. That day, before the bike rolled in, Marcus had already felt tension building. Rick had been on edge all week. A corporate audit, declining reviews, customers complaining about sloppy work. The pressure had to go somewhere, and Marcus had learned he was often the easiest target. Still, when the bike arrived, Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't know whose it was, didn't care. He only saw a problem that needed fixing, and a chance to do what he loved the way his father taught him. What Marcus didn't know was that this moment would pull every hidden thread in the shop tight. That the quiet imbalance he'd lived with for years was about to snap. And that the world he'd learned to survive in was about to be forced to see him, whether it wanted to or not. The shop had a rhythm Marcus knew by heart. Air compressors hissed like tired lungs. Wrenches clinked against concrete. A radio murmured low from the corner, half drowned by engines being tested and shut off again. It was the kind of controlled chaos Marcus found comfort in, predictable, mechanical, honest. He was finishing up a routine service when the motorcycle rolled in. Not loud, not demanding attention. Just a smooth glide to a stop, the engine settling into silence like it trusted the space it had entered. Marcus looked up immediately. It wasn't the brand that caught his eye first. It was the way the bike moved, balanced, disciplined, cared for. No rattles, no loose vibrations. Whoever rode it understood machines the way Marcus did, not as toys but as partners. The rider stayed seated for a moment, scanning the shop. No sunglasses, no impatience, just observation. Rick Donovan noticed too, but for a different reason. Rick straightened, adjusted his shirt, and put on the smile he reserved for customers he thought mattered. He stepped forward, already rehearsing the version of himself he liked best, confident, in charge, important. Before Rick could speak, the rider said calmly, "I'm having a throttle response issue. Comes and goes, thought I'd get a second opinion." Rick nodded quickly. Yeah, we can take a look, you're in good hands." Marcus listened from across the shop, his attention sharpening. A throttle issue that comes and goes wasn't simple. Intermittent problems were the hardest to diagnose, the kind that could get someone killed if missed. Marcus wiped his hands, already mentally tracing possible causes. Rick turned to the mechanics. "Who's free?" A younger tech shrugged. Another avoided eye contact. Marcus stepped forward. "I can check it." Rick's head snapped around. For half a second, his expression flickered, annoyance, calculation, something darker. Then it hardened. "I've got it covered," Rick said flatly, waving Marcus off. Marcus paused. This wasn't unusual. Rick had been doing this more often lately, blocking him from customer-facing work, especially when the customer looked important. Still, Marcus didn't argue. He stepped back. Rick crouched near the bike, tapping the throttle awkwardly, asking surface-level questions. The rider answered politely, but Marcus could see it. Rick wasn't listening. He was guessing. The rider frowned slightly. It only happens at higher speeds, feels like a delay than a sudden surge. Marcus couldn't help himself. That sounds like... Rick shot him a look sharp enough to cut. Didn't ask you. The shop went quiet in that way it always did when Rick asserted himself. Marcus felt the familiar burn in his chest, not anger but restraint, years of swallowing words. Rick stood, brushing his hands together. Probably just needs a recalibration, happens all the time. The writer hesitated. I've already had that done twice. That did it. Marcus stepped forward again, voice calm, measured. If you don't mind, I think it might be the custom throttle mod, if it's even a millimeter off. Rick exploded. I said I've got it, he barked loud enough to turn heads. You think you know better than me now? Marcus froze. The writer looked between them, sensing something deeper than a mechanical disagreement. Rick lowered his voice, but it was worse now, sharp, humiliating. You don't make calls here, you work on what you're told to work on. Marcus swallowed. Every instinct told him to walk away. But another instinct, the one his father taught him, wouldn't let him ignore a dangerous problem. He looked at the writer. If it surges like you said, that's not something to guess on. Rick stepped closer to Marcus, invading his space. You trying to embarrass me in front of a customer? I'm trying to keep him safe, Marcus replied. That was the moment. Rick's face reddened. His authority had been challenged, quietly, professionally, but publicly, and Rick couldn't tolerate that. Fine, Rick snapped. 5 minutes, that's it. Marcus nodded and got to work. He didn't rush, he didn't dramatize. He treated the bike with the same respect he'd give any machine entrusted to him. He tested the throttle, listened, felt the hesitation, subtle but real. He disassembled the custom mod carefully. And there it was. A misalignment so slight it would escape anyone not trained to feel for it. Installed by someone who knew how parts fit, but not how they moved together under pressure. Marcus corrected it, realigned the housing, tested again. Smooth, responsive, honest. The writer watched closely, eyes narrowing with appreciation. That's exactly where it felt wrong, he said. Marcus nodded. It would have gotten worse. Rick crossed his arms, jaw tight. You done? Marcus wiped his hands. Yeah. The writer took the bike outside for a short test ride. Those 2 minutes stretched forever. Rick paced. The shop was silent again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The other mechanics knew. They always knew when Marcus fixed something no one else could. The bike returned. The writer removed his helmet slowly, a small smile forming. That fixed it. He looked at Marcus. You saved me a serious accident. Before Marcus could respond, Rick stepped in fast. Great, Rick said, forcing a laugh. Team effort, that's how we do things here. The writer's smile faded slightly. He turned back to Marcus. What's your name? Marcus opened his mouth. Rick cut in. He's one of our techs. I manage the floor. Marcus closed his mouth. Something shifted in the writer's eyes. Not anger, not yet awareness. Rick clapped his hands once. All right, back to work. Then he turned to Marcus, voice low, poisonous. Office, now. The door shut behind them. Rick didn't yell at first. That was never his style. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word meant a wound. You think you're special, Rick said. You think fixing one bike makes you untouchable. Marcus stood still. I was doing my job. No, Rick snapped. You were showing me up. I wasn't. I don't care what you were doing, Rick interrupted. What matters is what it looked like. Rick stepped back, folded his arms. You don't fit the image I'm building here. Marcus felt it then, the truth he'd avoided naming. This wasn't about policy, or procedure, or performance. This was about control. Rick opened the file cabinet, pulled out a folder already prepared. Clean out your locker, Rick said coldly. You're done. Marcus stared at him. You're firing me for fixing a bike. Rick shrugged, for insubordination. Marcus didn't argue. He nodded once, and walked out. He packed his things slowly, tools he'd brought from home, gloves worn thin from years of honest work. He felt eyes on him, some sympathetic, some relieved, some ashamed. The writer stood near the counter, silent. Marcus placed his gloves down gently, like laying something to rest. As he walked toward the door, the writer finally spoke. Why would you fire the best mechanic you have? Rick didn't hesitate. He's replaceable. Marcus stepped into the evening air. He didn't know yet that the door closing behind him wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The evening air outside the shop felt heavier than Marcus expected. It wasn't cold, but it pressed against his skin, thick with exhaust, dust, and unfinished thoughts. The neon sign above the shop buzzed faintly, flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or finally burn out. Marcus stood there for a moment, helmetless, empty-handed, listening to the familiar sounds of the place he no longer belonged to. He'd imagined this moment before, being pushed too far, walking away with pride. But imagination never captured the quiet afterward, the way your chest tightens when there's nowhere specific to go, the way dignity doesn't pay rent. Inside the shop, life resumed almost instantly. Rick clapped his hands again, louder this time. "All right, show's over," he announced. "Let's get back to work." No one laughed, no one responded. The other mechanics avoided each other's eyes. They knew what they'd just witnessed wasn't about rules. It was about fear. About a man protecting his position by cutting down anyone who threatened it. Rick noticed the silence and scowled. "What, you all got engines to fix?" Tools started moving again, but the rhythm was off. Wrenches slipped. A compressor hissed longer than it should have. The shop felt hollow without Marcus, like a body missing its spine. Near the counter, the rider lingered. Rick straightened when he noticed. "Anything else we can help you with, sir?" The rider studied him for a long moment, not aggressively, not accusingly, just fully, the way someone looks when they're connecting dots. "No," the rider said finally, "I'm good." Rick exhaled, relieved, glad to hear it. The rider turned toward the door, then paused. "You know," he said casually, "I've been riding a long time." Rick smiled thinly. "Yeah, you seem like you know your way around a bike." "I do," the rider replied. "Enough to know when someone understands machines and when someone understands power." Rick's smile faltered for half a second. "Not sure what you mean." The rider nodded once, as if confirming something for himself. "You will." And with that, he left. Rick watched him go, irritation prickling at the back of his neck. He shook it off quickly. Famous or not, customers came and went. Employees were easier to replace. That's what he told himself. Across town, Marcus sat in his car with the engine off. The silence inside was louder than the shop had ever been. His hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers still curled as if gripping tools that weren't there anymore. He stared through the windshield without seeing anything. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. What he felt was something deeper, a slow, aching exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying yourself carefully in places that were never built to hold you. He thought of his father, Elijah Hill, standing over an engine, refusing shortcuts even when money was tight. "If they can replace you," his father used to say, "let them try. Skill leaves a gap they can't fill." Marcus let out a long breath. Right now, the gap didn't feel powerful. It felt terrifying. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages, just the reality waiting for him when he turned the key. Inside the shop, that reality was already forming. A young mechanic struggled with a bike Marcus usually handled. He tightened something too far, stripped a thread, his face drained of color. Rick noticed what happened. I don't know," the mechanic stammered. "It just—" Rick cursed under his breath. "Move, I'll handle it." He didn't. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The bike refused to cooperate. A customer waiting nearby crossed their arms, annoyed. "This is taking longer than you said," the customer snapped. Rick forced another smile. "We're just being thorough." But doubt crept in. For the first time since firing Marcus, Rick felt it, the uncomfortable awareness that he'd removed something essential. Not just a worker, a stabilizer. Still, pride wouldn't let him admit it. Back at home, Marcus finally turned the key and drove. He didn't go far, just to his garage. The door creaked open, revealing a familiar sanctuary, tools neatly arranged, an old engine block sitting on a stand, half disassembled. His father's project, the one Marcus never had time to finish. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For the first time that day, Marcus allowed himself to sit down. The anger came then, quiet, controlled, but real. Not the kind that made him want to yell, the kind that asked dangerous questions. How good is good enough? How long do you keep proving yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you? He rested his hands on the engine block, feeling the cool metal under his palms. Across town, the rider sat on his bike at a red light, helmet resting against his thigh. He replayed the scene in the shop, Marcus's calm voice, Rick's sharp tone, the way power had spoken louder than truth. He'd seen it before, different industries, same pattern. Talent silenced, ego elevated. The light turned green, but the rider didn't move right away. He made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of pity. Out of respect. Because what bothered him most wasn't that Marcus had been fired. It was how easily it happened. The shop lights flicked off one by one that night. Rick locked the door, satisfied despite the lingering irritation. He told himself the shop would be fine. Better even, no more challenges, no more quiet defiance. He didn't notice the small details already slipping. The unfinished work orders, the tools left slightly out of place, the unease settling into the walls. And he certainly didn't know that the man he'd dismissed as replaceable had just stepped into the most dangerous position of all. The position where nothing was left to lose. The confrontation was over. But the consequences were only just beginning. The days after Marcus Hill was fired moved strangely. Too fast in some moments, painfully slow in others. Monday morning arrived whether he was ready or not. The sun cut through the small gap in his curtains, landing on the empty chair where his work jacket used to hang. For years, that jacket had been the first thing he reached for. Habit had muscle memory. Purpose had routine. Now there was nothing waiting for him. Marcus lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the neighborhood waking up. Cars passing. Someone arguing faintly 2 houses down. Life continuing without pause. He finally sat up and rubbed his face. Getting fired wasn't new. What hurt was how cleanly it happened. No warning, no conversation, just erasure. As if years of loyalty, skill, and restraint could be deleted with a single sentence. He brewed coffee he barely tasted and checked his phone again. Still nothing. No apology, no message from coworkers, no call asking him to come back just for today. That silence said more than words ever could. Marcus spent the morning updating his resume, listing certifications that had once impressed people and now felt like defensive armor. He sent applications to shops across the city. Some didn't respond. Others replied politely, vaguely. "We'll keep your information on file." He recognized the tone. It wasn't rejection, it was avoidance. By early afternoon, frustration crept in. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew how the industry worked. Word traveled. Shop managers talked. And Rick Donovan had influence not because he was exceptional, but because he was loud, confident, and always positioned himself as the authority. A label like difficult stuck easily to men like Marcus, especially when they refused to play small. Across town, the motorcycle shop felt different without him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in subtle, accumulating ways. Jobs took longer, diagnostics missed nuances, minor mistakes slipped through inspections. The kind of things Marcus would have caught without thinking, a vibration here, a sound there. Rick noticed the delays immediately. "What's taking so long?" he snapped more than once that day. The mechanics shrugged, flustered. They were competent enough, but competence without intuition has limits. By Wednesday, customer complaints started trickling in. One rider came back angry about a recurring issue that should have been fixed. Another questioned a bill that didn't match the work done. Rick smoothed things over with discounts and forced smiles, but irritation simmered beneath the surface. At night, when the shop closed and the noise stopped, Rick stayed behind longer than usual. He didn't admit it, but the silence reminded him of something he didn't want to confront: how much the shop had relied on someone he'd dismissed as replaceable. Still, pride refused to budge. Rick told himself Marcus was a problem employee. That order mattered more than talent. That letting him stay would have sent the wrong message. Yet every unfinished job whispered otherwise. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself back in his garage more often. At first it was habit, then it became refuge. He worked on small projects, tuning an old bike for a neighbor, fixing a friend's brake system. Word spread quietly, not online, not loudly, just the way real trust does. People noticed. "You got a gift," one rider said after a clean repair. "Why you working out of a garage?" Marcus just smiled, temporary. But inside, something was shifting. For the first time in years, he worked without someone hovering over him. No rushed timelines, no pressure to stay invisible, just him, the machine, and the standard his father taught him. Still, uncertainty lingered. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Marcus Hill," the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Denise Carter. I manage a custom bike shop on the east side. I heard you might be looking for work." Marcus straightened. "I am." There was a pause. "I'll be honest," Denise said. "I heard good things about your skills, also heard mixed things." Marcus expected that. "I don't cause problems," he replied calmly. "I fix them." Another pause, longer this time. "Come by tomorrow," Denise said finally. "Let's talk." Hope flickered, cautious, guarded. That same evening, Rick faced a different kind of pressure. A long-time customer had returned, furious. A repair done by one of the newer mechanics had failed mid-ride. No injuries, but close enough to scare. "This never happened before," the customer said. "Not when Marcus was here." The name hit Rick harder than he expected. He bristled. "We follow strict procedures." "Procedures don't replace experience," the customer shot back. "You fired the wrong guy." Rick refunded the job in silence. After the customer left, Rick stood alone in the shop, jaw tight, replaying the words. "You fired the wrong guy." Across the city, another man replayed the same moment for different reasons. Keanu Reeves sat at a small kitchen table, scrolling through notes he'd taken over the past few days. Names, shops, quiet observations. He wasn't angry. He was thoughtful. What stayed with him wasn't the firing itself, it was Marcus's reaction. The restraint, the dignity, the refusal to perform pain for an audience. Keanu respected that. He also respected patterns, and he'd seen enough of them to know this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a system working as designed until it was. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Hey," he said when the line connected. "I need a favor, low-key." Back in his garage, Marcus finished tightening a bolt and stepped back to admire his work. The engine purred smoothly. For the first time since being fired, he felt something close to control. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that conversations were happening without his name being spoken, yet clearly about him. He only knew one thing. Whatever came next, he wouldn't walk into it small. The rising action had begun, quietly, deliberately, pulling every character toward a moment none of them could avoid. The morning Marcus walked into Denise Carter's shop, he felt the difference immediately. The space was smaller, quieter, but intentional. Every tool had a place. Every bike waiting for service had a handwritten tag describing its problem in detail. Denise didn't rush him. She asked about his training, his approach, his boundaries. When Marcus explained how he worked, she listened, really listened, like skill mattered more than ego. But she was honest. She admitted the industry talked, that Rick's version of events had already circulated. Marcus didn't defend himself. He simply said, "Watch me work." Denise nodded. The decision wasn't immediate, but respect had entered the room. That was enough to steady Marcus's breathing as he left, knowing nothing was promised, but something had shifted. Outside, engines roared past, but for once uncertainty didn't feel like failure. It felt like movement, slow and deliberate, finally pointing somewhere new, somewhere earned through patience, restraint, and years of being overlooked without breaking, unseen but unbent, tired but still standing upright. Today mattered. Back at Rick's shop, pressure accumulated without spectacle. It came as delayed deliveries, repeated mistakes, and quiet conversations between customers who once trusted the place completely. Rick responded the only way he knew how, tightening control. He hovered over shoulders, corrected tone, not technique, and reminded everyone who signed their paychecks. The shop felt smaller, louder, brittle. One afternoon, a bike stalled during a test ride. The rider returned, shaken. Rick blamed bad fuel. The mechanic knew better, but stayed silent. Silence had become policy. That night, Rick scrolled through old performance reports and realized how often Marcus's name appeared beside solved problems. The realization irritated him. Dependence felt like weakness. He shut the computer, refusing to call. Admitting error felt worse than operational failure, so he chose denial. unaware that consequences were already compiling quietly, patiently, and without asking permission to arrive soon, heavier each passing day, measured in trust lost, confidence shaken, and authority thinning despite his grip tightening harder. Fear followed, unspoken, growing, corrosive, inevitable, nearing exposure. Meanwhile, Marcus's reputation moved differently. It didn't shout. It traveled rider to rider, whispered over gas stations, coffee, and long rides. People spoke about his hands, how they seemed to listen. Small jobs turned into steady evenings. Marcus charged fair prices, explained every fix, and refused unnecessary work. Trust grew. Still, uncertainty lingered. He tracked expenses, counted days, and wondered how long momentum could carry him. Late one night, he found an envelope in his mailbox. No logo, just his name. Inside was a handwritten note, brief and direct, praising his work and asking him to call. Marcus stared at it, suspicious, hopeful, guarded. Opportunity had always come with conditions. He placed the note beside his father's old wrench, symbols of past and future resting together. Whatever came next, he would choose carefully, unwilling to trade dignity for stability again, unwilling to shrink himself to fit rooms built too small for truth. He slept lightly, alert to change, trusting skill, not promises, to guide him forward, steady, resolved, prepared. Always. Keanu Reeves observed from a distance, careful not to interfere prematurely. He had learned that systems revealed themselves when allowed to strain. He spoke quietly with riders, shop owners, and mechanics, asking questions that sounded casual but weren't. Patterns emerged. The same stories, different faces, skilled workers sidelined, credit redirected, authority protected. None of it shocked him. What stayed with him was Marcus's restraint. Many men responded to injustice by burning bridges. Marcus had simply stepped away, trusting time and truth. Keanu respected that. He made a list, not of demands, but of questions he would ask when the moment arrived. He wasn't interested in rescuing anyone. He believed respect mattered more than charity. When he finally intervened, it would be to reveal truth, not replace consequences. Until then, he waited, patient as the road, confident pressure would do its work, bending lies, exposing weakness, and clearing space for something earned, solid, and honest to stand without apology when silence finally broke. It always did eventually, without mercy, without noise. The city seemed unaware of the convergence underway. Rides continued, shops opened and closed, yet beneath routine, tension tightened. Marcus felt it in his chest each morning, Rick felt it in delayed reports, and Keanu felt it in unanswered questions. Everyone stood on different edges of the same truth. The system that protected Rick depended on silence. The skill Marcus carried depended on visibility. Those needs could not coexist much longer. A reckoning didn't announce itself. It gathered weight moment by moment, fed by choices already made. When it arrived, it would feel sudden, even though every step toward it had been deliberate. For now, the rise continued, steady and unavoidable, lifting hidden truths toward daylight, carrying each man closer to a moment where denial would collapse, skill would stand, and silence would finally lose its power to protect the wrong side of history, leaving only accountability, consequence, and the cost of choices paid in full, without shortcuts, without excuses, without replacements for truth once exposed and demanded by everyone. Pressure reshaped relationships subtly. A mechanic at Rick's shop began double-checking his work, afraid of mistakes. Another started searching job listings quietly. Loyalty eroded not through rebellion but caution. Rick sensed it, responding with stricter rules, earlier mornings, later nights. Exhaustion followed. Authority demanded energy he didn't have. Across town, Marcus fielded more calls, each one reinforcing his confidence while draining his body. He paced himself, remembering burnout as another form of loss. Denise called again, asking him to return, this time to test a complex build. Marcus agreed cautiously. He refused contracts without clarity. Boundaries became protection. Keanu monitored reactions online, noticing small shifts in tone. Stories aligned. The rise accelerated, tension tightening like a cable pulled from both ends, neither side willing to release. Knowing release meant exposure, admission, and change no one controlled anymore. Only faced, endured, and answered with honesty or collapse when the strain finally exceeded denial's limits. Snapping quietly, decisively, without warning, without mercy, without retreat, leaving consequences standing, waiting, undeniable, unavoidable, close. Now. Denise's shop became another proving ground. Marcus diagnosed the build methodically, explaining each adjustment aloud. Denise watched, impressed by clarity, not flash. When the engine finally settled into balance, she smiled. "That's the difference," she said. "You teach machines to cooperate." Marcus accepted the compliment quietly. Respect felt better when earned. She offered him flexible terms, room to grow, and credit where due. Marcus didn't decide immediately. Independence still mattered. Elsewhere, Rick faced a review he hadn't anticipated. A regional rep requested explanations for complaints. Rick deflected, blaming staffing shortages. The rep asked why a senior technician was dismissed. Rick hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Keanu received a call confirming timelines. The pieces aligned, not dramatically, but firmly. Momentum built through accountability rather than outrage. Patience rather than spectacle, setting the stage for confrontation rooted in facts, not emotion. Ensuring the truth would land clean, unavoidable, and final when revealed fully, leaving no room to hide, pivot, or rewrite what had already happened in plain sight, witnessed, recorded, remembered, and waiting. Marcus drove home thoughtful, weighing offers against principles. Stability tempted, but freedom called. He remembered his father's refusal to rush decisions. Meanwhile, Rick prepared defensively, drafting memos, rehearsing explanations, convincing himself authority equaled correctness. The shop hummed uneasily. Keanu scheduled a return, ordinary on the surface, purposeful underneath. No announcements, no spectacle, just timing. Each man felt the approach of something final. The rise stretched longer than expected, testing patience. Marcus refined his craft. Rick hardened his posture. Keanu sharpened questions. When truth finally demanded space, it would take it. Until then, every choice added weight. Every delay increased impact. Rising action wasn't noise. It was accumulation, steady and precise, compressing consequences into a moment impossible to ignore. All roads pointed forward, narrowing options, clarifying stakes, stripping illusions, preparing the ground where denial would finally fail. Integrity would be tested, and courage would speak without raising its voice. Heard because it was true, not loud, not protected, not replaceable, but earned, lived, and proven through restraint and resolve alone. Always. Tension finally settled into clarity. Marcus chose neither escape nor submission. He prepared to stand openly, trusting evidence and reputation. Rick prepared defenses that assumed silence would continue. Keanu prepared presence, understanding weight changed rooms. The city remained indifferent, but momentum didn't. The rise reached its crest invisibly, a held breath. Every delay sharpened consequence. Every choice narrowed paths. When confrontation arrived, it would feel earned, unavoidable, and complete. Marcus closed his garage, tools clean, mind steady. Rick locked his office, rehearsed lines memorized. Keanu mounted his bike, calm, intentional. Rising action gave way to readiness. The next moment would demand truth, and none of them could control how it landed. Only how they stood, only whether they answered honestly or hid again. The rise ended not with noise, but with resolve, firm and quiet, waiting to be tested, waiting to speak when silence no longer served injustice. And dignity finally claimed its space without permission, apology, or retreat, standing because it had always been there, patient, proven, undeniable. Now. The stage was set, not by spectacle but by accumulation. Every overlooked effort, every quiet correction, every unchallenged slight contributed. Rising action did its work, aligning character with consequence. Marcus carried skill and restraint. Rick carried authority and denial. Keanu carried awareness and timing. None could step away now. Momentum required resolution. The rise pressed them forward, narrowing the gap between truth and exposure. When the confrontation finally broke open, it would reflect every choice already made. Nothing extra, nothing hidden, just accountability meeting reality. The rise ended here, balanced on the edge of revelation, steady and unavoidable, carrying all of them toward a moment that would define who they were when power was questioned, skill was seen, and silence finally failed to protect injustice, leaving truth standing alone, unafraid, unhidden, and impossible to dismiss, replace, or erase, because it had been earned slowly, painfully, and honestly over time, waiting for this exact moment to arrive, complete, irreversible, and ready to be faced by everyone involved. Willing or not, here. The shop was unusually full that morning. Not loud, not chaotic, just busy in a way that felt different, heavier. Bikes lined the bays, customers lingered instead of leaving, mechanics moved with stiff focus. Rick Donovan stood behind the counter, pretending not to notice how many eyes drifted toward the door every few seconds. He told himself it was nothing. Just another day, another rush, another test of control. But his jaw was tight, and his coffee sat untouched. The bell above the door rang. Conversation softened instantly. The rider walked in calmly, helmet tucked under his arm, dressed simply, black jacket, worn boots, no attempt to announce himself. Some customers recognized him immediately. Others sensed importance without knowing why. Whispers rippled, but he didn't acknowledge them. Keanu Reeves moved through the shop like someone who understood space. Rick straightened, surprised but eager. This was good. High-profile return, proof that the shop still mattered. "Hey," Rick said, forcing warmth. "Good to see you again, everything running smooth." Keanu nodded, smooth enough. He glanced around, eyes landing briefly on the workstations. The missing rhythm was obvious to him now. He turned back to Rick. "I had a question," Keanu said evenly. Rick smiled, sure anything. "Where Marcus Hill?" The name hit the room like a dropped wrench. A mechanic froze mid-motion. A customer stopped scrolling on their phone. Rick's smile stiffened. "I told you," Rick said quickly. "He doesn't work here anymore." "I know," Keanu replied. "That's why I'm asking." Rick blinked. "I'm not following." Keanu set his helmet on the counter. "I've been around bikes most of my life. Shops, riders, builders, good mechanics are rare. Ones with judgment are rarer." Rick crossed his arms defensively. "We've got plenty of skilled people." Keanu didn't argue. He looked past Rick toward the bays. "Then why are there 3 bikes here with issues that shouldn't still be issues?" Silence. Rick laughed nervously. "That's just workload happens." Keanu nodded. "It does, especially when the person who quietly prevented those issues isn't here anymore." Rick felt something slip. "Look," Rick said, lowering his voice. "Marcus crossed lines, undermined management. I had to make a call." Keanu studied him. What line did he cross? Rick hesitated just long enough. "He didn't respect hierarchy." "Did he respect the work?" Keanu asked. Rick frowned. "That's not the point." Keanu leaned in slightly. "It is to me." Customers shifted closer, drawn in without realizing it. No one interrupted. No one wanted to. Rick cleared his throat. He was insubordinate. Keanu nodded slowly. "By fixing my bike." Rick snapped, "By making me look incompetent." The words escaped before Rick could stop them. The shop went completely still. Keanu didn't react immediately. He let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. "So that's it," he said quietly. "Not safety, not policy, ego." Rick flushed. "You don't understand how things work here." Keanu straightened. "I understand exactly how things work here. I've been watching." Rick scoffed. "Watching what?" Keanu turned toward the customers. "How many of you have had repeat issues since Marcus left?" A man near the window raised his hand slowly. Then another. Then another. Rick spun around. "This is inappropriate." Keanu ignored him. "How many of you were told your problems were fixed, and were?" More hands. Rick's voice rose. "This is my shop." Keanu met his eyes calmly. "Then own it." The door opened again. Marcus Hill stepped inside. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just clean jeans, a dark shirt, hands steady at his sides. He hadn't planned on this being public. He'd been invited to talk privately, or so he thought. Every head turned. The room felt smaller instantly. Rick stared. "What is he doing here?" Keanu glanced back at Marcus. "I asked him to come." Marcus met Rick's eyes, unflinching. Not angry, not triumphant, just present. Rick laughed sharply. "This is ridiculous. He doesn't work here." Keanu nodded. "Correct, you fired him." Rick jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "For cause." "For correcting a dangerous mistake," Marcus said calmly. Rick snapped back. "You embarrassed me." Marcus took a breath. "I protected a rider." The difference hung between them. Keanu turned to Rick. "You said he was replaceable." Rick straightened. "He is." Keanu looked around. "Then replace what he did." Rick faltered. "What do you mean?" Keanu picked up his helmet. "My throttle issue wasn't cosmetic, it was structural. It would have failed at speed." Rick swallowed. "It was minor." Marcus spoke again, steady. "It was." Rick snapped. "You don't get to speak." Keanu raised a hand, not commanding, just firm. "Let him." Marcus stepped forward slightly. "The mod was misaligned. If I hadn't corrected it, it would have surged again, harder, unpredictable." A customer frowned. "That happened to me last week." Another added, "Me too." Rick backed up a step. You're all exaggerating. Keanu shook his head. No, you minimized. Rick's voice cracked. You don't run a business by letting employees undermine you. Keanu replied softly. You don't run one by silencing competence either. Rick's mask cracked then, just a little. You think you're better than me? Rick snapped at Marcus. Marcus met his gaze. No, I think the work matters more than who gets credit. That did it. Rick laughed bitterly. This is all about race, isn't it? The word landed sharp. Marcus stiffened but didn't respond. Keanu did. No, he said evenly. This is about power. You'd rather be right than be responsible. Rick shook his head. You don't get it. Keanu stepped closer. I get that you fired the one person keeping this place honest. Rick snapped, you don't know him. Keanu looked at Marcus. I know how he worked, quiet, precise, no shortcuts, no ego. Rick shouted, that's not leadership. Keanu replied, that's integrity. Rick's voice dropped, desperate now. What do you want? Keanu didn't hesitate. Accountability. Rick scoffed, from me. Yes. Rick laughed hollowly, and if I do? Keanu looked around the shop. Then everyone here knows exactly what this place values. The customers murmured, mechanics exchanged looks, the truth had settled. Rick realized too late that authority without respect was just noise. He turned to Marcus, voice low. You think this wins you something? Marcus answered quietly, I didn't come to win. Rick sneered, then why are you here? Marcus lifted his chin. So the truth isn't buried with my silence. The room felt like it exhaled. Keanu stepped back, giving space. That's all I needed. Rick stared at him. You're just going to leave. Keanu nodded. Yes. He turned to the customers. Ride safe, ask questions. Then to Marcus, thank you. Marcus nodded back. Rick stood alone behind the counter, the weight of the moment pressing in. No applause, no cheers, just consequence. The shop hadn't been silenced by shouting. It had been silenced by truth. And everyone in that room knew it. Including Rick. The silence Keanu left behind didn't fade when the door closed. It lingered. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy, the kind that settles into walls and forces people to sit with what they've heard instead of rushing past it. No one rushed back to work. No one spoke. The shop, for the first time in a long while, felt honest. Rick Donovan stood behind the counter, staring at the surface as if answers might be etched into it. His authority hadn't been stripped away by a signature or a headline. It had been hollowed out in front of witnesses. That was worse. Customers didn't yell, they didn't demand refunds. They simply began to leave one by one, quieter than they'd arrived. A few nodded at Marcus on their way out. One man stopped and said, You fixed my bike last year, never had an issue since. Then he walked away. Rick said nothing. Marcus stayed where he was, unsure if he should move or leave. He hadn't planned to stay long. He'd come to speak truth, not linger in its aftermath. Still, something held him there, not hope, not pride, but a sense of closure he hadn't expected. A younger mechanic finally broke the silence. I didn't know, he said quietly, not to Rick, but to Marcus, about how much you covered for us, how much you fixed that never got written up. Marcus looked at him and shrugged gently. It was the job. No, the mechanic replied. It was more than that. Others nodded. No one defended Rick. No one attacked him either. The reckoning had passed the need for noise. Rick cleared his throat. Everyone back to work. No one moved immediately. They did eventually, slowly, without energy. Something fundamental had shifted. Control no longer felt natural. Obedience felt fragile. Rick retreated to his office. Behind the closed door, he sat down heavily, elbows on his desk, hands clasped. He replayed every moment with Marcus, the warnings, the dismissals, the decision to fire him. For the first time, Rick allowed himself to name what he'd avoided. Fear, not of Marcus himself, but of what Marcus represented. Skill that didn't need permission, competence that didn't flatter authority, quiet confidence that exposed insecurity. Rick had mistaken obedience for loyalty and silence for respect. Now the shop felt unstable because the lie holding it together had cracked. Meanwhile, Marcus stepped outside. The air felt lighter than it had days ago, not because things were suddenly perfect, but because something unresolved had finally been said out loud. His phone buzzed. A message from Denise Carter. Heard what happened today. Come by when you're ready. Offer still stands, no rush. Marcus exhaled slowly. He drove home, passing streets he'd traveled countless times, but everything looked subtly different. Not brighter, just clearer. The fear that had followed him since being fired had loosened its grip, not gone, but quieter. That evening, he returned to his garage. He didn't work right away. He sat on an overturned crate, staring at the engine block that once belonged to his father. He ran a hand along its edge, grounding himself. Elijah Hill had taught him that resolution didn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looked like peace earned honestly. The next few days unfolded without spectacle. Rick's shop didn't collapse overnight, but it didn't recover either. Reviews mentioned inconsistency. Riders went elsewhere. Mechanics started leaving, not angrily but cautiously, sensing instability. Rick was forced to confront the truth he'd resisted. Systems built on suppression eventually eat themselves. Rick called Marcus once. The call went unanswered. Not out of revenge, out of clarity. Marcus wasn't interested in returning to a place that had already told him who it was. Instead, he met Denise again. This time, the conversation was different. She didn't ask him to prove himself. She asked what he wanted. Marcus was honest. I want to work where skill is respected, where I don't have to shrink to survive. Denise nodded, then don't shrink. They agreed on a partnership structure, flexible, transparent, respectful. Marcus would lead complex builds. He'd mentor younger mechanics. His name would be attached to his work. Credit wouldn't be optional. Word spread. Not because Keanu Reeves endorsed anyone publicly. He didn't, but because writers talked. They talked about the shop that listened, about the mechanic who explained, about the man who didn't rush, didn't talk down, didn't hide mistakes. Marcus's schedule filled. Slowly, steadily. One afternoon, weeks later, Marcus was finishing up a build when a familiar motorcycle rolled in. He recognized it instantly. Keanu removed his helmet and smiled faintly. Still running smooth, he said. Marcus nodded, good to hear. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. Before leaving, Keanu paused. You handled that the right way. Marcus replied quietly, I just told the truth. Keanu smiled. That's harder than people think. Then he was gone again, back to the road, back to anonymity. At Rick's shop, change came slower. Rick remained, but diminished. The shop survived, but only barely. Authority without trust proved exhausting to maintain. Rick eventually stepped down from day-to-day management, citing burnout. The words were easier than confession. He never apologized to Marcus directly. But he stopped pretending the firing had been about policy. That mattered, even if no one applauded it. Marcus didn't celebrate Rick's fall. He didn't need to. He'd already moved on. Months passed. Marcus stood one evening in Denise's shop, watching a younger mechanic finish a repair Marcus had guided him through. The work was clean, confident, correct. Marcus felt something unfamiliar, not pride in himself, but relief. The relief of no longer carrying someone else's insecurity. He locked up that night and stood outside, listening to engines fade into the distance. The road stretched forward, uncertain but open. Marcus knew now that dignity wasn't something granted by bosses or systems. It was something you protected even when it cost you. Especially then. The resolution wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was complete. This story isn't really about motorcycles, fame, or even injustice in the workplace. Those are only the surface. At its core, it is about dignity and how easily it can be ignored, underestimated, or crushed when power goes unchecked. Marcus's journey reminds us that skill, honesty, and character often exist quietly. They don't announce themselves. They don't beg for validation. In many systems, especially those built on hierarchy and fear, such people are seen as threats rather than assets. Not because they are wrong, but because they expose insecurity in those who lead without integrity. Rick represents a common failure of authority, confusing control with leadership. He believed rules mattered more than people, obedience more than truth, and his position more than fairness. In doing so, he lost the very thing that gives authority meaning, trust. The story shows that power maintained through suppression eventually collapses under its own weight. It may not fall loudly, but it always weakens from within. Keanu's role is equally important. He doesn't save Marcus with influence or money. Instead, he does something far rarer. He listens, he observes, and when the moment comes, he speaks the truth without cruelty. His presence reinforces a powerful idea. Real respect is shown by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. The moral also speaks to patience. Marcus does not seek revenge. He does not humiliate Rick or demand public apologies. He chooses self-respect over spectacle. By walking away and rebuilding in a healthier environment, he proves that success rooted in dignity lasts longer than victory fueled by anger. Ultimately, the lesson is simple but demanding. Silence may protect your job, but it slowly erodes your self-worth. Speaking the truth may cost you comfort, but it preserves who you are. Systems that ignore quiet excellence will eventually lose it. And dignity, once defended, becomes a foundation no one can take from you. The story teaches that justice doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives as peace, the quiet certainty that you chose integrity over fear, and that is enough.